The Silvercrest Pack's sacred mating ceremony was a spectacle that drew every wolf from miles around, steeped in ancient tradition and untold power. It was more than a ritual, it was a defining moment in the lives of every pack member, a night where futures were set, destinies entwined, and bonds forged under the moonlit sky. The air was thick with anticipation, crackling with energy, the scent of burning sage wafting through the woods like a fragrant warning of what was to come. An ancient stone circle, worn by centuries of rituals, stood at the heart of the ceremony. The stones were etched with faded symbols of the pack's ancestors, the deep grooves in their surface filled with the dust of history. Torches flickered around the perimeter, their flames dancing wildly in the cool night breeze, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Each flicker illuminated the faces of those gathered, the warriors, the elders, the young, all standing in hushed reverence. Even the wolves, in their human forms, felt the weight of the tradition. Among the gathered was Lyra, hidden at the edge of the crowd. She stood in the shadows of a towering oak tree, barely noticeable, a silent observer of the events unfolding before her. Her eyes, dark and contemplative, traced the figures of the Alpha, Nathaniel Thorne, and the potential mates paraded before him. But her mind was elsewhere. She didn't belong here, not really. She was part of the pack by blood, but she was still a foreigner in its midst. A defective wolf, a term that haunted her like a curse, kept her at a distance from those around her. Unlike the others, Lyra couldn't shift into her wolf form, a crucial rite of passage in the pack. The others had grown into their beasts with ease, their wolf sides wild and free, while Lyra remained human. It was a flaw that made her feel inadequate, like she wasn't whole, like she wasn't enough. The truth of her nature had been hammered into her by whispers, by side glances, and by the clear exclusion of the pack. She was an outcast, marked by her inability to shift. To the pack, that was a glaring imperfection, something that could never be overlooked. Lyra's gaze shifted to the Alpha, Nathaniel Thorne, standing tall in the center of the stone circle, his presence commanding and unyielding. His dark eyes scanned the gathered crowd, his posture exuding power and authority. But there was something more behind that hard gaze. Nathaniel was a force of nature, a ruler who demanded respect but offered little in return. He had no time for weakness, and his leadership was founded on strength, something Lyra could never offer. His reputation was one of absolute control, and his decisions were made without hesitation. As Alpha, Nathaniel was the embodiment of everything the pack stood for. Aunt Marine, ever the dutiful matron of the pack, stood beside Lyra, her eyes gleaming with determination. She gave Lyra a subtle but firm push forward. "It's time," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Lyra resisted, her feet rooted to the spot, unwilling to move into the circle. She wasn't ready for this. Not tonight. The ceremony wasn't just about the mating. It was a declaration of one's place in the pack, and Lyra was not prepared to declare herself anything more than a failure. She had been born into this world of wolves, but she couldn't partake in it fully. Her heart raced with a fear she couldn't control. "You've done your duty every year, Lyra," Marin continued, her voice taking on a hint of impatience. "The ceremony is as much a part of you as it is the rest of the pack. Don't let your doubts stop you now." Lyra clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could feel the weight of her aunt's words, but she could also feel the weight of her own shame. She didn't belong. She was an outsider. The rest of the pack had their wolves. They had their purpose. She had only her human side, and it was a side that kept her from being whole. Reluctantly, Lyra stepped forward. She moved with a grace that belied the turmoil inside her, performing her ceremonial duties as if they were second nature. She handed out the ceremonial wine to the candidates, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she held the crystal chalices. Each drop of the wine was sacred, said to reveal one's true nature, to bond two souls in a way that transcended the physical. But for Lyra, the wine meant nothing. It was just another piece of the ritual that reminded her of her inadequacy. Her eyes flitted back to Nathaniel as he surveyed the gathered women, his gaze cold and calculating. He barely glanced at Lyra, his attention focused on the potential mates, the women who had the power to shift, to lead, to be worthy. Kira, the pack's most beautiful and respected wolf, stood near the front, her eyes gleaming with ambition. Lyra couldn't help but notice the way Kira looked at her, patronizing, almost smug. Kira had once been her friend, but now their paths had diverged so completely that there was no trace of the bond they once shared. The ceremony continued, with Lyra standing silently at the periphery, an invisible thread tying her to the event, yet keeping her apart. She wanted to leave, to escape the suffocating weight of the pack's expectations. But she knew she couldn't. Not tonight. The ceremony would end, but the truth of her place within the Silver Crest pack would remain. As the night drew on, the power of the sacred ceremony filled the air, reverberating through the hearts of every member. Lyra felt the shift, the subtle but undeniable pull toward the pack's heart. She may not have been part of the pack in the way they expected, but she would always be bound to them. No matter how far she ran, the pack would be her home, for better or worse. The torches flickered one last time as the mating ceremony reached its peak. But Lyra stood in the shadows, watching. She wasn't a candidate, she wasn't a leader, but she was a wolf, one that the pack had forgotten, but one who would eventually find her place. The Silver Crest pack's sacred mating ceremony had taken a quiet turn. The stone circle, once filled with the flicker of torches and the rustling of excited whispers, now seemed subdued. The air was thick with tension, an undercurrent that no one could quite name. But Lyra felt it deeply, the stillness that settled in her chest. The weight of the pack's unspoken expectations pressed down on her, and as much as she wanted to slip away into the shadows, she couldn't. This was her reality. She was part of this world, whether she felt like it or not. Lyra stood at the back of the stone circle, away from the main event, where the other women stood, all eyes on the Alpha. Alpha Nathaniel Thorne. His presence was magnetic, undeniable. It was as if the very earth beneath their feet shifted when he moved. He exuded power, like an ancient force brought into the modern world. His gaze swept over the potential mates, and the pack held its breath in anticipation. His opinion was everything. His choice would shape the future of the pack. The ritual was simple. The women were presented, one by one, to Nathaniel. He would scan them, watch their movements, their reactions to the wine they were offered, and decide which of them would be his mate. The power to choose the future Luna was something every woman in the pack coveted, but it was also a power that terrified them. To be chosen by Nathaniel was to hold a position of unrivaled authority, but it also meant living under the unforgiving scrutiny of the entire pack. No matter who you were, the price of leadership was steep. Lyra watched as Kira, the most popular and admired of the candidates, was called forward. Kira was everything that Lyra was not: confident, graceful, and beautiful beyond compare. Her wolf form was sleek and powerful, her golden eyes sparkling with ambition. She stood tall, her chin held high, ready for the spotlight. Kira had always been the pack's golden girl. She had the perfect lineage, the perfect form, and she knew how to use them. Lyra had once been close to her, a time when they shared laughs and dreams of the future. But now, standing on opposite ends of the circle, it was impossible to see any trace of the bond they had once shared. Lyra felt a pang of jealousy in her chest, one that she quickly shoved aside. She had no right to feel jealous of Kira. They weren't even in the same league. Kira had been chosen time and time again to represent the pack, to stand at Nathaniel's side, even if only in the public eye. She was everything the pack valued, everything Lyra was not. And now, as Kira stood before Nathaniel, Lyra couldn't help but feel the deep rift between them widen. Kira stepped forward, the ceremonial wine gleaming in her hands. She tilted her head slightly, offering Nathaniel a smile that seemed too practiced, too calculated. It was the smile of someone who knew the power of her beauty, someone who had used it to get ahead in life. The moment Kira met Nathaniel's gaze, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition. Lyra couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a certain connection between them, a quiet understanding that seemed to resonate in the space between them. But it wasn't a connection of love. It wasn't something as tender as affection. It was power. Kira took a sip of the ceremonial wine, her eyes still locked on Nathaniel. The wine was said to reveal a wolf's true nature, to bond the two mates in a way that transcended the physical. The ritual was an ancient one, practiced by generations of wolves in the Silver Crest pack. It was said that the wine revealed not just the truth of their souls, but also their strength, their destiny. A single sip could alter the course of everything. Kira stood there, poised, waiting for Nathaniel's judgment. Lyra couldn't help but notice the tension in the air, the way the pack seemed to hold its collective breath. All eyes were on Kira, but it was Nathaniel who mattered. He was the one who would decide. The moment stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Nathaniel nodded. His face remained unreadable, his eyes piercing as he assessed Kira. But then he spoke. His voice was deep and steady, carrying the weight of authority that only he could command. "You have the strength and the grace," Nathaniel said, his voice reverberating through the circle. "But your ambition is clouded by your ego. I do not choose you." Lyra felt a shudder run through her. The words were like a strike to the chest. Kira, who had always been the pack's golden girl, had been rejected. Her carefully constructed facade of perfection had been shattered in an instant. The shock on Kira's face was palpable. It was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in her otherwise flawless exterior. For the first time, Kira looked human, and it was in that moment that Lyra understood the truth. Power wasn't about perfection. It was about something deeper, something that could not be faked. Kira's eyes burned with a mixture of disbelief and fury as she stood there, the wine cup still clutched in her hands. She bowed her head, her pride not allowing her to speak, but her glare toward Nathaniel was enough. The pack could feel her anger, a storm that simmered just beneath the surface. Lyra's heart thudded in her chest. Kira's rejection was a blow, not just to Kira herself, but to Lyra as well. It was a reminder of everything she could never be. But there was something else that lingered in Lyra's mind, something that had nothing to do with Kira's rejection. It was the way Nathaniel had looked at her. His cold, calculating gaze had softened for just a moment when he turned away from Kira, as if the rejection had been a weight lifted from his shoulders. There was something unsettling in that look. Lyra could feel it in her bones. It wasn't just that Nathaniel had rejected Kira. It was that he had rejected her for reasons that went beyond power. Lyra's thoughts spiraled. She wasn't ready to confront them, not yet, but she couldn't help herself. There was a tension between her and Nathaniel that couldn't be ignored. It was something that had been building ever since their first encounter, when he had silently observed her from across the room. He had watched her carefully, as if he saw something in her that no one else did. As the ceremony continued, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that Nathaniel's eyes had never really left her. She wanted to shrink into the shadows, to disappear from his gaze, but she couldn't. The pull between them was undeniable, a quiet tension that stretched between them like a taut wire. But it wasn't just Nathaniel's attention that unsettled her. It was the weight of the pack's expectations. The realization that she was still here, still watching, when she should have been a candidate, when she should have been one of the women vying for Nathaniel's attention. But here she was, just an observer, a failure, an outsider. Lyra's thoughts were interrupted when her aunt, Maureen, nudged her again. "It's your turn," she whispered, her voice urgent. Lyra turned, feeling the familiar pang of dread curl in her stomach. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. With a deep breath, Lyra stepped forward. The ceremony was far from over, and now she was about to play her part. The Silver Crest Pack's mating ceremony had only just begun to settle into its expected rhythm when it was abruptly shattered by the deafening sounds of chaos. The deep, mournful howls of the Black Claw Pack echoed across the night air, sending a shockwave of fear and confusion through the gathered wolves. It was a sound that no one in Silver Crest had expected to hear tonight, of all nights. Yet there it was, louder than the ceremonial chants, more menacing than the crackling of the torches, and far more urgent than any declaration of unity. Lyra's heart skipped a beat, her instincts immediately kicking in. The festive atmosphere of the ceremony had been torn asunder, replaced with the unmistakable scent of blood and the raw tension of impending battle. The warriors surrounding the stone circle stiffened, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons, their eyes scanning the dark horizon where the Black Claw's threat was rapidly approaching. The Alpha, Nathaniel Thorne, stood still for a moment, as though the world itself had paused in reverence for him. His sharp eyes cut through the sea of pack members, his commanding presence undeniable even in the midst of the growing panic. He didn't speak immediately. There was no need to. Every warrior in Silver Crest knew what to do. They had trained for moments like this, where strength and survival meant more than ceremony. Yet it was still impossible to shake the urgency in the air. A warrior, breathless and wide-eyed with fear, rushed up to Nathaniel, dropping to one knee in front of him. "Alpha," the warrior gasped, "the Black Claw Pack is attacking. They've crossed into Silver Crest territory. We need to defend, now! Nathaniel's face remained impassive, but his eyes gleamed with a cold fury. His jaw clenched, and without hesitation, he turned to address his pack. His voice boomed over the noise, cutting through the frenzy with the authority that only an alpha could wield. "Defend the pack! Keep the ceremony ground secure," Nathaniel ordered, his voice low but powerful. "We will drive them back. No one leaves the circle." At his command, the pack moved like a well-oiled machine. Warriors trained for battle since childhood leaped into action with swift precision. Their sharp claws, their heightened senses, all of it honed for moments like this. Lyra stood frozen for a heartbeat, her eyes wide with the realization of what was unfolding before her. Her pulse quickened, and despite the chaos, her thoughts raced. The Black Claw Pack was a dangerous enemy, one with whom Silver Crest had a long-standing feud. The timing of their attack couldn't have been worse. Nathaniel, ever the strategist, quickly scanned the crowd. He locked eyes with a few trusted warriors and pointed toward the eastern border. "You take the flank. Guard the eastern perimeter. The rest of you secure the west. I'll lead the charge." The warriors scattered without another word, their movements synchronized like clockwork. It was clear that this was not a new threat. This was part of the perpetual war between the two packs, a war that Silver Crest had prepared for, but never truly wished to engage in. Lyra watched as her fellow pack members, fearless and ready, ran toward the front lines. But there was no place for her in this fight. Her hands clenched at her sides, useless. She was no warrior, no fighter. She was not even a wolf. Despite her inner conflict, Lyra's sense of duty couldn't allow her to stand idle. The ceremony had turned into chaos, but there was still something she could do. She wasn't a fighter, but there was another role she could play. Her heart raced as she turned on her heel and ran toward the back of the stone circle, where the healing den lay hidden among the trees. It was a place she was familiar with, a place where she had spent hours learning from the healers, absorbing the knowledge passed down through generations. Lyra didn't hesitate as she approached the den's entrance, where healer Tessa was already preparing supplies. Tessa was a woman of few words, but in the heat of battle, her presence was invaluable. Tessa glanced up as Lyra arrived, and without a word, handed her a basket filled with healing herbs. "There's no time to waste," Tessa said quickly, her voice low but steady. "The wounded will be coming in soon. Get the salves ready." Lyra nodded, immediately falling into the rhythm of the work she knew so well. While warriors fought on the front lines, she was needed here, in the den, where her skills as a healer could make a difference. It was the one place in the pack where she didn't feel like a failure. Here, her human side was not a hindrance, but a strength. She quickly began preparing the herbal mixtures, her hands moving with practiced ease. Lavender for soothing pain, yarrow for stopping bleeding, mint for calming the nerves of the wounded. She knew the plant life around Silver Crest as well as anyone. She'd spent years learning about the medicinal properties of the forest, studying herbs and plants that could ease the suffering of the pack. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. As the first wounded warriors arrived, Lyra worked quickly and efficiently, applying balms and bandages to their injuries, her thoughts quieting with the focus of the task at hand. She barely noticed the severity of their wounds, scrapes, cuts, broken bones, but there was no time to think about what could have happened or what might happen next. The wounded needed help, and that was all that mattered. But as the night stretched on, the severity of the attack became clear. Lyra had been trained to treat cuts and bruises, but she had never faced anything like this. The Black Claw Pack fought with a ferocity that left little room for mercy. They didn't just fight to win, they fought to destroy. Lyra moved between the warriors, soothing their pain and offering what comfort she could. Yet, despite her steady hands, there was a lingering feeling deep in her chest, something that felt wrong. The attack wasn't just a random strike. It was personal. She couldn't shake the thought that someone had orchestrated this, someone who knew exactly how to break the Silver Crest Pack's defenses. As the hours passed and the pack continued to fight, Lyra's thoughts turned back to Nathaniel. She had seen him fight before, with ruthless efficiency. But tonight, he was something different. There was something wild in his eyes, something untamed. He led his warriors with an intensity that Lyra had never seen before. It was as if the battle had awakened something within him, a primal need to protect his pack, no matter the cost. Lyra couldn't help but wonder, as she prepared yet another bandage for a bleeding warrior, if Nathaniel had known the Black Claw Pack would attack. Had he been prepared for this moment? Or had he simply been waiting for the right moment to show his strength? Her heart pounded in her chest as the sounds of battle continued to echo through the night. The Silver Crest Pack had been thrown into chaos, but they were fighting back with everything they had. And Lyra, standing in the healing den, was doing her part, no matter how small it seemed. But deep inside, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an attack. It was a turning point for the pack, for Nathaniel, and for her. The sounds of battle continued to rage through the night, but in the healing den, it was as if time moved at its own, slower pace. The sharp tang of blood mixed with the earthy scent of herbs, creating an atmosphere of focused calm amid the chaos outside. Lyra, though surrounded by the wounded, felt an eerie sense of clarity. This was where she belonged. Not on the front lines with the warriors, not in the stone circle with the potential mates, but here, quiet, unseen, yet indispensable. Tessa, the healer, worked alongside Lyra, her movements swift and purposeful as she tended to the injured. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a quiet confidence in Tessa's every action. She was a seasoned healer, and Lyra had learned everything she knew from her. But even Tessa's calm demeanor could not fully mask the desperation in her eyes. The Black Claw Pack's attack was more brutal than anyone had expected. Lyra's hands shook slightly as she applied poultices to a deep gash on a warrior's arm. The wound was ugly, the blood soaking into the bandages despite her best efforts. Her mind raced, her heart thudding in her chest. Every time she finished treating one person, another would be brought in, sometimes barely conscious, their faces pale with pain. There was no rest, no time for hesitation. The warriors had returned from the front lines in varying degrees of injury. Some had managed to escape with nothing more than superficial cuts, while others had sustained broken bones, deep lacerations, and vicious claw marks. Lyra's role in the den had become clear. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a healer in her own right, and her skills were in high demand. There was no time for self-doubt, no space for the voice in the back of her mind that reminded her she wasn't a real wolf. Here, her human side was not a weakness. It was the one thing that allowed her to see beyond the fight, to focus on the well-being of those around her. A warrior with a deep, jagged wound across his chest was brought in next, carried by two others. He was unconscious, blood soaking through the torn fabric of his shirt, staining his skin a dark crimson. Lyra rushed to his side, her breath catching in her throat. This man was larger than most of the warriors she had treated, his muscles taut with strength, yet now he was vulnerable. "This one is bad," Tessa said quietly, crouching beside her. "He needs more than just salves. We need stitches, and quickly. He's losing too much blood." Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed a needle and thread, her hands working quickly, skillfully, as she had been taught. She could feel the warrior's pulse beneath his skin, his life force slipping away with every second that passed. She concentrated hard, blocking out the sounds of the battle still raging outside, blocking out the fear that wanted to creep into her mind. She had to focus. She had to save him. The warrior groaned as Lyra sewed his wound closed, her hands steady despite the pressure. There was something deeply grounding about the act of healing, something that made her feel connected to the world in a way nothing else could. She was not just patching up injuries, she was fighting for survival, fighting to protect the pack in a way that was uniquely hers. After what felt like hours, the warrior's wound was finally stitched and bandaged. His breathing was shallow, but he was stable for the moment. Lyra wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her, but she couldn't stop. Not now. There were more to save, more to treat. And as the night wore on, the healers worked without pause, their hands moving with a quiet urgency, preparing tinctures, dressing wounds, and offering what comfort they could. Amid the chaos of the attack, there were moments of solace. Small moments that reminded Lyra of her place in the world. One of the warriors, a young man no older than Lyra herself, gripped her hand tightly as she tended to his arm. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice ragged but filled with gratitude. "You're saving us." Lyra forced a smile, though the weight of his words pressed heavily on her heart. She wasn't saving anyone. Not truly. She was simply doing what needed to be done, as she always had. But hearing those words, hearing the sincerity in his voice, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she was missing. Tessa gave Lyra a brief, approving glance as she moved to prepare another batch of healing salves. "You're doing well," she murmured, as though reading Lyra's thoughts. "You have more strength than you realize." Lyra nodded, but the doubt lingered. Was it enough? Would it ever be enough to fill the emptiness she often felt within herself? To be seen as something more than just a shadow of the pack? The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. Now was not the time for questions. Now was the time for action. As the night wore on and the attack slowly subsided, Lyra found herself alone for the briefest of moments. The wounded had been tended to, the worst of the injuries stabilized, and the healers were taking a moment to catch their breath. The quiet was strange, almost unnatural after the chaos of battle. She allowed herself a moment to sit on a nearby stool, her muscles aching from hours of work. Her mind wandered back to the battlefield, to Nathaniel. She had seen him fight with the same cold precision he displayed in every other aspect of his life. He was a leader, a protector. But tonight, he had also been a warrior. She had seen a side of him she had never noticed before, a fierceness that seemed to awaken with the scent of danger. He had led his pack through the chaos with unyielding resolve, commanding respect from every warrior who fought alongside him. For the first time, Lyra found herself wondering what it would be like to stand by his side, not as an observer, not as an outsider, but as his equal. She could see it, her place within the pack, her role as a healer, as someone who could help lead the Silver Crest Pack to a new future. But there was still so much she didn't understand. Could she ever be more than what she was? Could she ever truly be part of the pack, despite her weaknesses? The sound of footsteps approaching pulled Lyra from her thoughts. She stood quickly, turning to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway of the den. His face was marked with the grime of battle, his clothes torn in places, but his gaze remained as sharp and cold as ever. Yet there was something else in his eyes. A quiet appreciation, perhaps, or a flicker of something deeper that Lyra couldn't quite name. "You did well tonight," Nathaniel said, his voice rough but sincere. "You've proven your worth, Lyra." For a moment, Lyra could only stare at him. His words felt like a shock, an unexpected acknowledgement of everything she had done that night. But more than that, they stirred something inside her, a longing for more, a desire to be seen for what she was, not what she lacked. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice betraying the emotion she wasn't ready to face. "But I'm just doing what needs to be done." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "That's what makes you strong," he said quietly. "The willingness to step up when the pack needs you. And tonight, the pack needed you." Lyra's heart raced in her chest as she met his gaze. For the first time, she felt like something more than just the healer on the sidelines. Maybe, just maybe, she could be something more. The sounds of battle had finally subsided, and with it, the silence in the aftermath seemed even more oppressive. The Silver Crest Pack had weathered the worst of the attack, but the toll it had taken was evident. The wounded had been tended to, the warriors given time to rest, but the air remained heavy with the lingering tension of the night. Lyra stood in the corner of the healing den, watching the healers work and listening to the muted voices of those gathered outside. It was a strange, uneasy calm that had descended over the pack. She wiped her hands on the ragged cloth she held, though they weren't dirty anymore. It was the mental exhaustion that weighed heavily on her now. It had been hours since the attack ended, yet the images of bloodied warriors and panicked cries lingered in her mind, haunting her with every passing second. She had done everything she could, but it never felt like enough. There was always something more she could have done. Some wound she might have treated better. Some life she might have saved. But as the den grew quieter, Lyra's thoughts shifted. The stillness brought with it a sense of dread, but also a sense of clarity. This was her moment. The warriors were recovering. The immediate threat had been quelled, and the ski pack would eventually return to its routines. And while she wasn't sure what her place was in the grand scheme of things, there was one certainty. Something was about to change. As she turned towards the entrance, her breath caught. Standing in the doorway was none other than Alpha Nathaniel Thorne. His figure filled the frame of the door, tall and imposing as ever. His dark eyes met hers, sharp and calculating. His hair, usually neatly kept, was disheveled from the battle, a few strands falling across his brow. Despite the visible signs of the fight, blood staining his clothing, a few scratches on his face, there was a quiet strength in his presence. He was the same Nathaniel. But there was something different about him now, something she couldn't quite place. For a moment, the two of them simply stood there, staring at each other. The pack was recovering, the healers working tirelessly to ensure no one had been forgotten. Yet Lyra felt the weight of this moment settle around her like a dense fog. Nathaniel wasn't here for the injured, wasn't here to check on the progress of the ceremony. He was here for her. "Lyra!" Nathaniel's voice broke the silence, calm but commanding. "I need to speak with you." Her heart raced in her chest, but she nodded. "Of course, Alpha." He stepped into the den, and the air seemed to change the moment he did. His presence was a constant pull, an overwhelming force, and Lyra could feel herself caught in it. She had seen him lead before, had witnessed the power of his decisions and actions. But now, in this moment, she felt something else, something deeper, more personal. Something that had been slowly growing between them. Nathaniel closed the door behind him, sealing them in a quiet space away from the rest of the pack. He didn't sit, didn't waste time with pleasantries. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You've proven yourself tonight," he began, his voice steady but carrying an underlying intensity. "The way you handled the wounded, the way you kept your composure, it was impressive. It was everything the pack needed." Lyra wasn't sure how to respond. She had done what anyone would have done. She had acted without hesitation because that was what was required. But to hear it from him, to hear the Alpha acknowledge her strength, it was both humbling and unnerving. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider in the pack, and now here was Nathaniel, recognizing her, seeing her as something more than what she had always been told she was. "Thank you, Alpha," she said quietly, her voice betraying the unease she felt. Nathaniel's gaze softened just slightly, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space of the den. "You're not just a healer, Lyra. You're not just a defective wolf. You have more strength than you realize." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had spent her entire life believing that her inability to shift was a failure, that she would never be seen as part of the pack because of it. And now, here was Nathaniel, telling her something completely different, telling her that the very thing she had thought of as her weakness was actually her strength. Lyra swallowed, trying to steady her breath. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to acknowledge the unexpected kindness in his words, but her voice seemed to fail her. The moment was too overwhelming, too raw. Nathaniel took another step forward, and for the first time, Lyra saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just the cold, calculating leadership she had grown accustomed to. There was a vulnerability there, a quiet understanding, as though he saw beyond the role of Alpha and recognized something in her that no one else had. "I've been watching you, Lyra," Nathaniel said, his voice low. "Not just tonight, but for a long time, and I've come to a decision." Lyra's breath hitched. "A decision?" she echoed, her mind racing. She didn't know what he meant, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a growing sense of dread and anticipation twisting together inside her. Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her, his gaze intense, almost searching, as if he were weighing something, considering his words carefully. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, he spoke. "I choose you, Lyra. I want you to be my mate." The words hit her like a thunderclap, and for a moment she couldn't process them. Her mind spun, and she felt a dizzying mix of emotions swirl within her. Shock, disbelief, fear, and something else she couldn't name. You want me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, unable to believe what she was hearing. Nathaniel nodded, his expression firm, yet there was something softer in his gaze now, something that seemed to reach out to her. "Yes, you have more than enough strength to lead beside me. You're not a defective wolf. You're someone who sees beyond the surface, someone who has the heart of a leader, and that's what the pack needs." Lyra could hardly believe it. The words felt like a dream, like a distant hope she had never dared to entertain. Nathaniel Thorne, the powerful and distant alpha, was choosing her. Not for her bloodline, not for her wolf form, but for who she was, for the strength she had shown tonight, for the person she had always been beneath the weight of her own doubts. She opened her mouth to speak, to argue, to ask why, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself taking a step closer to him, drawn by the gravity of the moment. Nathaniel reached out, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture so soft, so unexpected, that it left Lyra breathless. "I know it's not what you expected," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice low and steady, "but it's the truth. You're more than capable, Lyra. You have a place with me, by my side, as my mate." For the first time in her life, Lyra didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like someone broken or incomplete. In that moment, she felt as though she had found her place, not just in the pack, but in the world. And as she looked up at Nathaniel, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always thought. The days that followed the attack were filled with a flurry of activity. Silvercrest had suffered a blow, but they had fought back with unwavering strength, as they always did. The pack was resilient, and though the scars of battle were still fresh on their bodies, their spirits remained unbroken. The warriors, though weary, carried on with their duties, ensuring the borders were secure, while the healers worked tirelessly to treat the last of the wounded. But amidst the chaos of rebuilding, Lyra found herself standing on the edge of something much more personal, much more unnerving. Alpha Nathaniel's words had not left her mind for a second. "I choose you." The weight of his declaration hung heavily in the air, and no matter how much she tried to push it aside, it would not leave her. Nathaniel had made his decision, and she had become his chosen mate. But what did that truly mean? Lyra could barely wrap her mind around it. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't the picture of strength that everyone in the pack expected. She was still that girl, the one who couldn't shift, the one who was often left behind in the shadows, struggling to find her place. Yet Nathaniel had seen something in her, something that made him choose her over all the other women in the pack. It wasn't because of her wolf form or her lineage. It was because of something deeper, something more intangible. She had no idea how to reconcile that with the life she had known. Lyra found herself alone in the healing den one afternoon, her thoughts more turbulent than ever. She had spent hours tending to the last of the wounded, and now, for the first time in days, she was given a brief moment to catch her breath. The scent of herbs filled the air, a familiar and calming presence, but it did little to soothe the chaos inside her. She wiped the sweat from her brow and sat down, leaning against the stone wall of the den. Her mind swirled with questions. questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Why had Nathaniel chosen her? Was he simply trying to fulfill his duty as Alpha? Or was there something more? Her thoughts were interrupted when the sound of footsteps echoed through the den. Lyra looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway. His presence was always commanding, but today it felt different. He wasn't the leader of the pack, the distant figure that everyone respected from afar. Today, he was just a man, standing before her, his gaze unwavering. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Nathaniel simply watched her, his eyes assessing, his jaw tight. Lyra shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. She had expected him to come to her sooner, to offer some explanation for his decision, but he hadn't. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "We need to talk." Lyra nodded, her heart racing in her chest. "About what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She couldn't avoid it anymore. The words that had been hanging in the air since his declaration needed to be spoken. Nathaniel stepped into the den, his presence filling the space. He didn't sit, but remained standing, his posture rigid with purpose. "About us," he said simply, as though the answer was obvious. Lyra swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't understand," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why not Kira or someone else?" Her words were raw, unfiltered, the frustration and confusion she had been carrying finally spilling out. Nathaniel's expression softened, though his eyes remained intense. "I've been watching you, Lyra," he said, his voice steady. "Not just tonight, but for a long time. I've seen the strength in you that you don't even recognize in yourself. You're not like the others. You don't fight for power or recognition. You fight for something else, something pure. You care about the pack in a way that others can't understand, and that's why I chose you." Lyra's heart stuttered in her chest. She had never seen Nathaniel like this, open, vulnerable even. The Alpha was always so controlled, so distant, yet here he was, speaking to her with a level of honesty that she wasn't prepared for. "I've always thought I was broken," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't shift. I'm not like the others. I'll never be able to do what they can do. I'm not strong like them." Nathaniel's gaze softened even further, and he took a step closer to her. "You are strong, Lyra, just not in the way they are. You have a different kind of strength, one that's not measured by the ability to fight or shift. It's a strength of heart, a strength of spirit. You see the world differently. You understand people in ways others can't, and that's why I need you by my side." Lyra shook her head, unsure of how to respond. She had never seen herself that way, never thought of herself as strong in any meaningful sense. But Nathaniel's words stirred something deep within her, something she had long buried. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I'm ready to be Luna." Nathaniel reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. The touch was warm, grounding, and Lyra found herself looking up into his eyes. For the first time since the mating ceremony, she saw something more than just the Alpha. She saw the man behind the leader, someone who cared, someone who wanted her, not because of her abilities or her status, but because of who she was. "You don't have to be ready yet," he said softly. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about growing into it, together. I see something in you, Lyra, something that no one else does. And that's why I'm asking you to be with me. Not as a duty, but as a choice. Lyra's heart raced as she processed his words. A choice. For so long, she had felt like an outsider, like she was never truly seen by anyone. But here was Nathaniel, offering her something real, something that went beyond the pack's expectations. He wasn't asking her to be someone she wasn't. He was asking her to be herself. With a deep breath, Lyra nodded. I don't know what this will look like, or what it will mean for me, she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. But I'm willing to try. Nathaniel's lips curved into a small, rare smile, his eyes lighting up with something Lyra couldn't quite name. That's all I ask, he said. We'll figure it out together. And in that moment, Lyra felt a shift, a quiet but undeniable change. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel broken. She didn't feel like she was living in the shadow of others. With Nathaniel by her side, she could face whatever came next. Together, they would find their place. The days that followed Nathaniel's declaration were a strange mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. The Silver Crest Pack had always been a place of strength and tradition, where the role of alpha was sacred, and the mate of the alpha was seen as the pinnacle of power and respect. But as Lyra and Nathaniel's bond deepened, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a tension that could not be ignored. Lyra had never truly been a part of the pack in the way the others were. She had spent years hiding in the shadows, feeling the weight of her inability to shift, feeling the sting of exclusion from the core of pack life. But now, with Nathaniel's decision to make her his mate, everything had changed. The pack had accepted her as one of their own, but the path forward was not going to be easy. As Lyra walked through the village in the heart of Silver Crest, she felt the eyes of the pack upon her. Some were filled with curiosity, others with skepticism. She was still an outsider in their eyes, still someone who didn't fit the mold. She had not earned the title of Luna through the traditional means, and some members of the pack were questioning Nathaniel's choice. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. She could hear the murmurs as she passed by groups of pack members, their voices lowered, but not low enough to go unnoticed. She's not even a wolf. How can she lead us? She's always been in the background. What makes her good enough for the alpha? What does Nathaniel see in her? What does she have that Kira doesn't? The words cut deep, but Lyra didn't let them show. She had learned to tune out the whispers over the years, to ignore the looks of disapproval and the sideways glances. But now, the weight of those thoughts seemed heavier, as though they were bearing down on her from all sides. She knew that Kira, in particular, was not pleased. The rejection from Nathaniel had been a blow to Kira's pride, and that bitterness had only festered in the days since the ceremony. Kira had been the obvious choice for Alpha's mate, the pack's golden girl. Her beauty, her strength, everything about her had been designed for the role. But now, Lyra was in her place, and Kira wasn't going to make that easy. Lyra had heard the rumors, seen the cold glares. Kira shot her way when their paths crossed. She had tried to avoid her, but Kira's presence was impossible to ignore. The other woman was a constant reminder of what Lyra could never be: perfect, graceful, and powerful. It was in the training grounds that their first true confrontation occurred. Lyra had been walking across the grounds when Kira approached her, her strides purposeful and commanding. There was no mistaking the venom in her gaze, the way her lips curled into a smile that was anything but friendly. "So, you think you can actually lead?" Kira's voice was low, but the sharpness in it sent a chill down Lyra's spine. Lyra stopped in her tracks, meeting Kira's gaze. She didn't know what to say at first. The words stuck in her throat. But she wasn't about to let Kira get the better of her. "I'm not trying to lead anyone," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I'm just here to help, to do what I can for the pack." Kira's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Help? You've never truly belonged here, Lyra. You don't belong in this role, and everyone knows it. You're an outsider, just pretending to be one of us. Do you think you can just waltz in and take the place that should have been mine?" Lyra's fists clenched at her sides, but she stood her ground. "I'm not pretending, and I'm not taking anyone's place. I'm just doing what Nathaniel asked me to do." Kira's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer. "You think he's doing this for you? He's using you. You're nothing more than a placeholder until someone better comes along. And when that happens, you'll be thrown aside like everyone else." The words stung, but Lyra didn't flinch. She had spent too many years listening to similar insults to let them break her now. She met Kira's gaze, her voice low but firm. "If Nathaniel chose me, it's because he saw something in me, something you can't understand. You can't just be mad at me because I'm here. You need to look at yourself and figure out why he didn't choose you." Kira stepped back, her eyes flashing with anger. "We'll see how long your little reign lasts, Lyra. Don't get too comfortable." Without another word, Kira turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight with pride, though the anger in her stride was palpable. Lyra stood there, watching her go, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected the confrontation to happen so soon, but now it was over, at least for the moment. The encounter with Kira left a bitter taste in her mouth, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. She was no longer an outsider. She wasn't going to let Kira, or anyone else, make her feel small. She was part of this pack now, whether they accepted her or not. Nathaniel had chosen her, and that was all that mattered. She would prove herself, not just to the pack, but to herself. That night, as the pack gathered for a meeting, Lyra found herself standing beside Nathaniel at the front. The murmurs of the pack quieted as the Alpha raised his hand for silence. His presence alone commanded respect, but as he turned his gaze to Lyra, something shifted in the room. There was a quiet tension, an uncertainty that lingered in the air. "Pack!" Nathaniel's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Tonight, we stand united. The Black Claw's attack was not just an assault on us as a pack. It was an attack on everything we stand for. But we have fought back, and we will continue to fight. We will remain strong." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, before they settled on Lyra. She felt the weight of his gaze, but she didn't look away. "I've made my choice," Nathaniel continued, his voice unwavering. "Lyra will stand with me as my mate, as your Luna. She is not just a healer. She is a leader, and she will prove herself in time." The pack was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling into the space between them. Lyra could feel the eyes on her, the skepticism and the doubt that lingered. But Nathaniel's words had given her the strength to stand tall. As the meeting continued, Lyra could feel the shift. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The pack was watching her now, not just as the alpha's chosen, but as someone they would have to learn to accept. And for the first time, Lyra felt like she truly belonged. The days following the announcement of Lyra's ascension as the alpha's chosen mate were filled with tension, though the pack had begun to adapt to the change. There were still whispers, still sideways glances, and muffled conversations when Lyra passed through the camp. The members of the Silver Crest Pack were a proud, traditional people, and for many, the idea of Lyra, someone who couldn't shift, someone who had long been an outsider, being made Luna was a bitter pill to swallow. Yet, as each day passed, they grew quieter, and the murmurs softened into reluctant acceptance. Nathaniel had been unwavering in his support for her, and Lyra found herself growing more and more accustomed to his steady presence beside her. The bond between them was undeniable, but it was more than that. It was a deep connection that transcended the physical, one that grew stronger with each passing day. The tension between them that had once been unspoken now felt like a tangible thing, a pull neither of them could escape, nor wanted to. But despite the strength of their bond, Lyra could still feel the weight of the pack's expectations pressing on her. She wasn't yet fully accepted as Luna. She wasn't sure if she ever would be. She had been thrust into this position by Nathaniel's decision, and now she was expected to fill a role she had never imagined herself in. The doubts she had buried deep within her heart began to resurface, questioning whether she was truly worthy of this title. The moment of doubt came to a head during the next full moon. The mating ceremony, the one she had once been an observer of, was now her own. The ritual, as old as the pack itself, would mark the official beginning of her bond with Nathaniel. It was a public declaration, one that would solidify their union in front of the entire pack. It was more than just a ceremonial act. It was a symbolic shift that would make her the pack's Luna, a position of great power and responsibility. Lyra stood at the edge of the sacred stone circle, her gaze fixed on the flames of the torches, which flickered in the cool night air. The circle was filled with pack members, warriors, elders, and the younger generation, all waiting for the moment that would change everything. The ceremony was an ancient tradition, one that had been passed down for generations, and it was just as important as the Alpha's selection. The ritual was said to strengthen the bond between the Alpha and Luna, to give them the power to lead together. Nathaniel stood beside her, his presence comforting, though his expression was as unreadable as ever. His hand brushed against hers briefly, a fleeting touch that sent a warmth through her. It was a reassurance, an acknowledgement of the bond they had forged, one that she now had to embrace fully, despite the fear that still lingered in her heart. As the ceremony began, the pack members circled around them, chanting the old words of the ritual. The air hummed with energy, and Lyra could feel the weight of tradition settling on her shoulders. The moon hung high above, its light casting an ethereal glow over the gathering, illuminating the faces of those who had once been skeptical of her. Now they watched her with silent judgment, waiting to see if she could truly embody the strength required of a Luna. Nathaniel turned toward her, his hand reaching for hers. Lyra hesitated for just a moment before taking it, her fingers wrapping around his. The touch was grounding, reassuring. The moment felt heavy, but also intimate, as though they were the only two people in the world. He gazed down at her with an intensity that she had come to know well. And in his eyes, she saw not just the alpha, but a man who cared deeply for her, for their bond. "You don't have to do this alone," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chants. "I'm here, always." Lyra swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding in response. "I know," she whispered, "but I have to do my part. For the pack. For you." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and they both turned to face the stone altar in the center of the circle. The ceremonial wine was placed before them, its dark liquid shimmering in the torchlight. It was said that the wine would reveal their true bond, solidifying their connection in the eyes of the pack. As Lyra picked up the cup, her hands trembling ever so slightly, she felt the weight of the ritual. This wasn't just a formality. This was her acceptance into a new life, a new role, and a new world. The wine was bitter on her tongue as she drank, the sharpness of it cutting through her nerves. She could feel Nathaniel's gaze on her, steady and unwavering, but she didn't look up. She was still unsure, still questioning if she was enough. But as the last drop of the wine left her lips, something inside her shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no sudden flashes of light or bursts of power. But it was as though something deep within her had clicked into place. The doubts that had plagued her, the fear of being inadequate, began to fade. She wasn't perfect, and she would never be the perfect Luna that some of the pack might want her to be. But she had her own strength, her own voice, and in that moment, Lyra realized that was enough. She turned to Nathaniel, her eyes meeting his with newfound resolve. He was watching her, waiting for something, though she wasn't sure what. She knew that their bond had been sealed in that moment, in the shared ritual, but it was more than just a physical connection. It was the trust they had built, the understanding between them. Nathaniel raised his cup to her, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond, and she did the same. Together, they drank. The moonlight above them shone brighter, and for the first time, Lyra felt at peace. The ceremony ended with the pack surrounding them, the chants now fading into quiet murmurs. The pack was still uncertain, still skeptical in some ways, but Lyra could feel the shift in the air. She was no longer an outsider. She was no longer just the healer, the one who couldn't shift. She was Luna. And though it would take time for the pack to fully accept her, she had taken the first step toward earning her place. Nathaniel's arm draped around her shoulders as they walked together toward the center of the gathering, and Lyra felt a sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about living up to anyone's expectations. It was about being true to herself and to the bond she shared with Nathaniel. Together, Nathaniel said softly, his voice just for her, "We will lead them. Together." Lyra nodded, her heart full of something she hadn't expected to find. Hope. They would face challenges, they would face doubts, but as long as they stood side by side, nothing could break them. And with that thought, Lyra realized she was ready. Not just to be Luna, but to be the leader she was always meant to be. The days after the mating ceremony were filled with a sense of tentative peace, but Lyra knew better than to believe it would last. The Silver Crest Pack had witnessed the changing of their leadership, and while some members had silently accepted her role as Luna, others were still uncertain. There were those who whispered, those who stared, and those who simply waited for her to prove herself. Lyra was no stranger to the weight of expectations, but now it felt heavier than ever. The pack was fractured, divided not just by the attack from the Black Claw Pack, but by the deep-seated traditions that had governed their way of life for centuries. Nathaniel had made his choice to embrace change, but not everyone was ready for that. There were warriors who still saw strength as only physical prowess, those who believed that only the most dominant wolves were worthy of leadership. And then there were the others, those who had always followed Nathaniel, who trusted his decisions, no matter how unorthodox they seemed. Lyra spent the first few days after the ceremony working alongside the pack, helping where she could. She offered healing remedies to those still recovering from the battle, assisted with training the younger wolves, and attended meetings with Nathaniel, where she began to familiarize herself with the political landscape of the pack. The role of Luna wasn't just about being a mate to the alpha. It was about standing by his side, making decisions, and supporting the future of the pack. Despite the heavy workload, Lyra found herself struggling to connect with the others. Kira's cold stares were impossible to ignore, and the older warriors treated her with an air of quiet disapproval. They weren't used to having a Luna who was different, who didn't fit the traditional mold of a powerful wolf. Lyra could feel their judgment in the air, thick and suffocating. She knew she had to prove herself, but the thought of doing so in front of the very pack that had once rejected her made her stomach churn with unease. Nathaniel, however, never wavered in his support. He had made his choice, and he stood by it with unwavering resolve. He often sought her out, his presence offering her a measure of comfort in the face of the growing tension. He would find her during the quiet moments, when she was tending to the wounded or helping with training. Sometimes he would simply sit beside her, not speaking, but offering a reassuring touch. Other times, he would discuss the challenges ahead, the steps they needed to take to unite the pack, to show them that things could be different. But despite Nathaniel's strength, Lyra couldn't shake the sense of loneliness that lingered. She was still an outsider, in the eyes of many, still a healer, not a warrior, and that made her feel as if she didn't truly belong. She had spent her life feeling like she wasn't enough, and now, even with Nathaniel's support, she couldn't escape the nagging thought that she wasn't cut out for this role. It wasn't until the following week that she truly understood what her place was within the pack. The day began like any other, with the pack gathering in the central clearing for a council meeting. Nathaniel was speaking to the leaders of the various warrior factions, discussing training strategies and ensuring the perimeter was secure. Lyra stood to the side, watching as the warriors nodded in agreement, discussing tactics and logistics. She had always admired Nathaniel's ability to command respect without raising his voice, but today something felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension that she couldn't ignore, a palpable sense of unease that seemed to hang over the meeting. As the meeting drew to a close, Kira approached the front, her eyes narrowed with a mixture of defiance and frustration. She had been quiet for the past few days, but now she was speaking up. "This is all well and good, Alpha," Kira said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But we can't ignore the fact that the pack is divided. Not all of us are ready to accept her as Luna. You're asking us to follow someone who can't even shift, someone who has no true strength." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow, and she could feel the weight of every gaze in the clearing turned toward her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't look away from Kira. She couldn't. "Enough, Kira," Nathaniel said, his voice cold and firm. "Lyra is Luna, because I've chosen her. Her strength is not defined by her ability to shift. It's defined by her heart, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to this pack." Kira didn't back down, her eyes flashing with bitterness. "You may have chosen her, Alpha, but the pack has not. And until she proves herself, you can't expect us to follow her." Lyra felt the anger surge in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't just about Kira. It was about the entire pack. She couldn't stand by and let them tear her down without at least trying to show them that she was more than they thought. Stepping forward, she addressed the crowd, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I understand your doubts," she said, meeting the eyes of the warriors and the elders who had gathered. "I've spent my whole life feeling like an outsider, like I didn't belong. But I'm not asking for your acceptance because of what I can or cannot do. I'm asking for your trust. I'm here because I believe in this pack, and I believe in each of you. I may not have your strength, but I have something else. I have the strength to lead with compassion, with understanding. I have the strength to stand by Nathaniel and help him build a future where every wolf has a place." The clearing fell silent, and for a long moment no one moved or spoke. Lyra could feel the weight of their judgment, but she stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let Kira or anyone else make her feel small anymore. Finally, Nathaniel spoke, his voice unwavering. "Lyra is my mate, and as my mate, she is the Luna of Silver Crest. We will lead this pack together, and I expect all of you to stand by her side, as you would stand by me." The silence stretched, but this time it was different. There were no more murmurs of dissent, no more sideways glances. The pack had heard her, and whether they fully accepted her or not, they knew she wasn't going anywhere. Over the following days, things began to shift. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, one by one, the pack members began to respect Lyra for who she was, not just as Nathaniel's mate, but as a leader in her own right. There were still those who remained distant, still those who questioned her every move, but it no longer mattered. Lyra had proven herself, not through strength or dominance, but through her resilience, her unwavering belief in the pack and the future she and Nathaniel would build together. And as she walked beside Nathaniel, her hand clasped in his, she finally felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't the warrior they had expected, but she was the Luna they needed. Together, they would unite the pack. Together, they would forge a new future for Silver Crest. The sun was rising over Silver Crest, casting a warm golden light across the pack's territory. The days of tension and uncertainty had passed, and in their place, a new sense of purpose had begun to take root. The pack, though still adjusting to the changes brought by Lyra's unexpected ascension as Luna, was beginning to thrive once more. The scars from the Black Claw Pack's attack were healing, both physically and emotionally, and the Silver Crest Pack had a renewed sense of unity. Lyra walked through the village, her steps more confident than they had been in weeks. She had always been a quiet observer, someone who watched from the edges, but now she moved with purpose. She had earned her place among the pack, not just as Nathaniel's mate, but as Luna, the heart of Silver Crest. Her bond with Nathaniel had only deepened, and together they had started to build a new future for their people. The pack had not fully accepted her at first. There were still those who doubted her, who questioned whether she could truly lead. But each day, Lyra proved herself more than capable. She helped guide the pack through the aftermath of the Black Claw attack, using her skills as a healer to tend to the wounded, and her ability to listen and understand to bring calm to those in turmoil. Slowly, the whispers had died down, replaced by respect and even admiration. But the road ahead was not without its challenges. There was still resistance within the pack, and that resistance was no more evident than in Kira's lingering resentment. The rejection from Nathaniel had cut deep, and while Kira had outwardly accepted the decision, Lyra could feel the animosity simmering beneath the surface. She had tried to reach out to Kira, to offer an olive branch, but the other woman had always kept her distance, her pride too sharp to allow for reconciliation. Lyra had never expected Kira to simply accept her. She knew it would take time for the pack to fully embrace her leadership. But the work ahead was greater than just proving herself to the pack. It was about uniting them, about showing them that change was possible, that strength came in many forms. As she made her way to the council's meeting space, Lyra caught sight of Nathaniel waiting for her, his presence as commanding as ever. But today, there was something different about him. The lines of tension that had marked his features since the attack seemed to have softened, replaced by a quiet calm that came from knowing the pack was on the right path. They had faced their challenges, and they had come through them together. "How's it going?" Nathaniel asked as she approached, his voice warm but focused. Lyra smiled, a feeling of peace settling in her chest. "Better than I expected. I think they're starting to trust me." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Good. It's never going to be easy, but I've seen the way you've handled everything. You're exactly what this pack needs." Lyra felt a rush of gratitude at his words, but there was something more, something deep and undeniable between them. They had started this journey together, and now they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. There was still work to be done, but Lyra knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had Nathaniel by her side, and together they would lead Silver Crest into a new era. The meeting began shortly after, with the various leaders and warriors of the pack gathered to discuss the future. Today, they would begin to plan for the future of the pack, not just in terms of defense and territory, but in terms of what kind of pack they wanted to be. The decisions they made today would shape Silver Crest for generations to come. As the meeting unfolded, Lyra listened carefully, offering suggestions when necessary, but always with a steady hand and a quiet voice. She was learning to find her place in these discussions, to understand the delicate balance between strength and compassion. Nathaniel guided the meeting with the confidence of an alpha, but it was clear that his trust in Lyra was growing. He valued her input, her perspective, and it was that trust that made her feel like she was finally stepping into the role she was meant to have. After the meeting ended, the two of them walked together to the edge of the pack's territory. The quiet beauty of the landscape stretching out before them. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and the soft sound of the river could be heard in the distance. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt at peace. Nathaniel turned to her, his expression serious but warm. "You've done more than I ever expected, Lyra. You've proven to me and to the pack that you have the heart of a leader. I'm proud of you." Her heart swelled with emotion at his words. She had never imagined herself in this role, never thought she could truly lead. But now, standing beside him, she realized that she was more than just a healer, more than just an outsider. She was Luna, and she had earned her place. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Nathaniel smiled, the corners of his mouth turning up in that rare, soft smile she had come to cherish. "I've always known what you were capable of." They stood together, the silence between them comfortable and filled with unspoken understanding. For the first time, Lyra realized that she wasn't just here by chance. She had earned this place, not by shifting into her wolf form, not by meeting some expectation of strength, but by being true to herself, by standing by Nathaniel, and by leading with compassion, patience, and wisdom. The pack was beginning to unite. And though the road ahead would not always be easy, Lyra felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was ready, not just for the role of Luna, but for the future that she and Nathaniel would build together. They turned back toward the pack, their hands brushing for just a moment. Lyra smiled, her heart full, as she looked ahead to the bright future that awaited them all. Together, they would lead Silvercrest, not just as Alpha and Luna, but as partners, equals, each bringing their own strengths to the table. And with that thought, Lyra knew that the Silvercrest Pack's future had never looked brighter